Thank you for joining us for this evening's event. My name is Nick, and I'm one of the events hosts here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. One of the many events we're looking forward to is American War by author Omar El-Akkad, in a conversation with Roy Scranton about El-Akkad's new novel, What Strange Paradise, this Tuesday, the 20th. If you don't already do so, please follow us on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Tonight, we are so excited to welcome J. Michael Straczynski and Tony Norman. Straczynski has written hundreds of hours of television, major motion pictures, and graphic novels, and is widely acclaimed creator of Babylon 5, co-creator of Netflix Sense8, and writer for Clint Eastwood's Changeling, which earned him a nomination and a British Academy Award for Best Screenplay. His work has appeared frequently on the New York Times bestseller list, and his extensive list of awards include the Hugo Award, the Ray Bradbury Award, the Eisner Award, and the GLAAD Media Award. The Breakfast Club meets the Silver Linings Playbook in Together We Will Go, Straczynski's powerful, provocative, and heartfelt new novel about 12 endearing strangers who come together to make the most of their final days. Mark Antonelli, a failed young writer looking down the barrel at 30, is planning a cross-country road trip. He buys a beat-up old tour bus. He hires a young Army vet to drive it. He puts out an ad for others to join him along the way. But this will be a road trip like no other. His passengers are all fellow disheartened souls who have decided that this will be their final journey. Upon arrival in San Francisco, they find a cliff with an amazing view of the ocean at sunset, hit the gas, and drive out of this world. By turns tragic, funny, quirky, charming, and deeply moving, Together We Will Go explores the decisions that bring these characters together and the relationships that grow between them, with some discovering love and affection for the first time. But as they cross state lines and complications to the initial plan arise, it becomes clear that this is a novel as much about the will to live as the choice to end it. Joining Straczynski in conversation this evening is Tony Norman. Norman is an award-winning columnist for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where he also serves as the paper's book review editor. Tony is the president of the National Society of Newspaper Columnists and a member of the advisory board of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. He is a founding board member of the International Free Expression Project and was recently appointed partner on the National A.W. Mellon Democratic Futures Project. He is currently working on a novel and counts J. Michael Straczynski as an unofficial mentor and inspiration. This evening's event will include an audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question, as well as if someone has typed a question you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Most importantly, please consider supporting Straczynski and Powell's by purchasing a copy of his new book from us. A link to buy Together We Will Go will be shared in the chat a couple times tonight. So, Joe and Tony, what a pleasure to welcome you both, and thanks for joining us this evening.
That's a lot to live up to, and I don't need that kind of pressure.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for that introduction. And first of all, I just want to say that it is indeed a pleasure to be here with you, Joe, and quizzing you about your novel, your writing process, your output, over the decades. This is truly, a moment for me, and I thank you folks for the invitation. Together We Will Go is a departure for you in many ways. You've written eloquently about your insecurities. So we know that you have them. But despite your great success, were you at all spooked about this particular kind of departure, making this run for the mid-list, as it were? How did you imagine the reception would be for Together We Will Go, given that it is such a departure from the sci-fi, from the comics, from the genre fiction that you've been identified with for so many years?
For me, I think you can't ever worry about that. You have to just follow where the stories take you. I've built most of my career, what I laughingly call my career, on taking chances and doing things that are not expected. I think to me, it's the difference between having, say, 10 years of experience as a writer versus 1 year of experience 10 times.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that I was taking a chance. I knew that there was a book about suicides already. You're not hitting the most popular topic, written in epistolary format, which is not done much outside of 18th century novels.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what could possibly go wrong with this?
There you
but
go.
if you're not taking chances, if you're not living on the wire, then there's no point to living. And,
now, what would be the elevator pitch for this novel for the folks who are like going, what are they talking about? What are they talking about? What is this Together We Will Go? Isn't this the Babylon 5 guy? Can you give us just a quick pitch for what the novel is without giving away any precious plot points? Because I'm still reading it.
Well, I think we had a good version of that in the introduction, but I guess for me, the most important kernel at the center of the story is the metaphor under which Together We Will Go operates, which is we have a bunch of characters who know they have a very short time left, either by virtue of the fact that they're already on the way out or they can't handle it anymore and they're going to walk off the earth together. And they have to decide how they want to spend those last days, weeks, and months. And we all have that choice in us. People think that they're immortal, and we're not.
Right.
And it's important to say, you have to make a conscious decision about how you spend your time and what makes it worthwhile. There's a thing, YOLO, you only live once, and live every day as if it's your last. And people often misinterpret that as saying, I'm going to go for all the gusto that I can. But what that really comes back to, if you look at the origins of where that all began, it's about living a life of integrity, that whatever you are doing right now, you will not regret. That you approach life with clean hands and composure, and you make the right ethical, appropriate decisions, so that if today is your last day, you have lived a life of integrity. Yes. And that's kind of what I brought on to bring to bear in this thing. I'm not sure much of an elevator pitch, unless it's a really, really tall building. But that's
right.
To me, what was the important part of it?
It's funny when I picked up the book, when it finally arrived in mail, I thought, well, this is J. Michael Straczynski. He's thinking about your past stuff. I was thinking, well, surely it will be, Ken Kesey and the merry pranksters go to hell, and it wasn't that. And it wasn't that at all. But I wonder, to what extent the fact that you were making this departure and taking this chance, did you read widely that kind of fiction, the kind of sort of gentle epistolatory fiction you're talking about, the deep existential novel that this seems to bear a lot more relation to than what you typically write? Or did you just sort of stumble on a style that worked for you?
I actually go the other direction, because I find that if I read things that are in the genre I want to approach, I'm like a sponge and I absorb stuff. And suddenly I'm not writing myself or my own voice anymore. I'm including all those other voices in it. And suddenly it gets very crowded in my head, best way I can put it. So whenever I'm doing whatever science fiction, horror, I avoid that genre completely for at least 3 or 4 months before I start writing in that genre, because I just don't want to absorb that stuff. Not good or bad, I just can't hear my own voice after a while. For me, coming from a background where I have a degree in psychology, so I understand the motif of suicide, what goes into that. Coming from having lost a lot of friends to suicide, I mean, a disturbing number of them. And I'm drawn to interior monologue. That's always what I've enjoyed writing the most. I sort of capitalized on those. And when I first started writing the book, my first thought was, how do I tell this story? And if I were to do a standard narrative, the problem you have is that you would never be able to get inside the characters in the way you would have to understand their decisions.
Yeah.
Movies work best when they are exterior. Novels work best when they are, for the most part, interior. And the best way I thought to do that was to go for an epistolary style that lets me let them tell their own stories in their own words. And my job is just to get the heck out of the way and let them do what they're going to do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, given your background in psychology and just what you sort of encountered in your life, you have these 12 characters who are very distinct, very interesting, very wounded, very broken. Is this also a way for you to sort of like deal with aspects of, past personas, past people you might have been, or even people that aren't necessarily you? I mean, every character has the DNA of its writer embodied in him or her. But are these characters in some way you dealing with questions in a more creative way than you might have been able to deal with in life? Are they not anything didactic, like they stand for specific aspects of you, but do they raise questions that you have struggled with?
Absolutely. Stephen King said, writers write what gets caught in their filter. And for me, that this issue is one that I've been wrestling with for a long time, because as I mentioned, I've had a number of friends who passed away from it. And in the aftermath, there's always the question, when did they make the decision? Could it have been changed? Why did it happen? Most of them seem to be, there's weird thing, there's nighttime suicides and daylight suicides. The nighttime suicides are the ones I think that happen overnight, suddenly it all jumps on you and you can't handle it anymore. And daytime suicides, or you've given a lot of thought and consideration, and then one day you decide, okay, I'm going to do this in a calm, rational fashion. And if in both those cases, what led to that final decision? Well, best way for me to understand how that worked is to get into their heads as people and let them show me how that process works. So in a way, what we're almost doing, because I've had other friends who attempted suicide and then survived, and afterward, the most common comment that I heard was, it ambushed me. That I didn't think I was capable of having that emotion. And what the book does, it walks you through all the permutations of that emotion and that decision. So in a sense, it almost kind of inoculates you against that eventuality.
So was this a more difficult book for you to write than, let's say, well, I mean, it's probably your, if I'm not mistaken, I think it is your first novel, like sort of mainstream novel. But is it more difficult to work on than, let's say, a series of scripts for you, because the issues are so much closer to who you are?
To a degree, I always try to incorporate some elements of myself into what I write, but in a screenplay, you always have the option that the story slows down, something blows up. Guy walks in the door with a gun, When in doubt, someone walks in the door with a gun or blows something up. And you didn't have that option with this story. It had to be about characterization. It had to be about dialogue. It had to be about what William Faulkner called the human heart in conflict with itself. So that was probably the hardest part of it, is just trusting those characters and letting them just do what they're going to do and let them work it through.
In the past, you've talked about knowing the ending and basically knowing the lay of the land as you're writing. To what extent did you understand what was going to happen with Together We Will Go as you were writing it? I mean, are you someone who plans things out before you sit down, or walk us through the process of putting together this book as opposed to things you've worked on in the past?
I think in general, the way that I work, because you want to leave room for yourself to be surprised. I think if you outline the hell out of everything, then you're just doing the book by the numbers. If you can't surprise yourself as a writer, you have no chance to surprise a reader.
Right.
So if I was driving from LA to San Diego, I know where I'm starting, I know where I'm going to finish, I know one or two places I want to stop on the way, but you leave yourself open to explore and maybe get off the road at an unexpected part of the journey and see what's there. So you have to leave room to be surprised. With this one, I knew where I wanted to start. I knew I had the bus. I knew I had Mark, a failed writer, who was going to hire a driver and go from here to there to finish the job. I knew a couple of the characters that I wanted to explore. I knew I wanted to deal with one character has chronic pain, one character heart issues, but also other characters that are coming at it from an intellectual perspective, from a nihilistic perspective. But I left myself room to be surprised. So for instance, there's a scene where they stop early on in the book to pick up a couple of different writers, and one of them was a woman who was bipolar and completely out of her mind most of the time. And I'm writing that whole scene down. I move her off, and I turn my attention to the second person, and in my head it said he was blue. What? What? What does that mean exactly? Did Smurf show up? What? And well, obviously the story knows more than I do at this point. I'm going to look into this. And sure enough, there's a syndrome called Eisenmenger syndrome, which the oxygen isn't properly circulated to the blood of the body, and the skin takes on a bit of a bluish tint. Okay, this story knows more than I do. Let's just go. And that motif became very important to the entire book, and that character became very important to the entire book.
I love the way you talk about the writing process, because I mean, you talk about it both in traditional terms, like just sitting down, applying butt to seat, but you also leave room for the sort of this mystical element, this element of discovery, of listening to the characters as if you're just taking it from another universe and sort of channeling it and so forth, which is very encouraging. I mean, because I think if anyone is prone to let's say, not being able to write because they're blocked or something like this, after listening to you, they have all the encouragement in the world to just keep at it, because it's almost like, just listen to the characters, just listen to what's going on, trust the story as if it's, apart from you. And I wonder, have you always felt that way, that the creativity that you have, in a sense, you're able to draw things from another world because you're smart enough to realize that it's not about you, it's the story, and you're just bringing it into focus?
Like I think most writers, I had to kind of figure that out over time. I wasn't there originally. I didn't understand that you don't make art happen, you let art happen.
There you go.
And I began, all about plot and structure and story and making the characters do what I thought they should be doing, whether it made sense or not. And you have to learn over time to just let go. Your job is to create the person in your mind well enough so that you can just watch what they do and not make it, like I said, it's not about you, as you were saying. It's about getting out of your own way and letting the art happen. There's a great story about a writer who was writing a novel about this woman who was a control freak, a bad person, just an annoying individual. And he needed to kill her off at one point. So she comes down the stairs, she hits a little bump in the carpet on the stair and tumbles on the stairs and lands dead. And he wrote that. And then she got up and said, no, that would not work. That doesn't happen. If I'm a control freak and a neat freak, there wouldn't be a bump in the carpet on the stairs. What you could do, moron, is as I step onto the stairs, I think, did I turn off the light? And I look back, and that's when I trip and fall. And he said, all right, let's try that. Let's try your idea. Whatever part of my brain is you, let's go for that. Brings her back up the stairs. She steps down, looks back, lights turned off, trips, falls, dies, stays dead. That's the writer's process. When you really can get out of your own way, it becomes very Zen-like after a while. It's very strange. Yeah.
How long did it take you to get to that point where you were able to sort of like trust the characters, the logic of the characters speaking to you, like that split moment and at that moment of decision? Was it early on in your writing process, or or was it like many years into writing that, this revelation came to you?
I think it was really Babylon 5 that tipped me over, because I wrote so many of those episodes. I wrote 92 out of 110 episodes.
That's amazing.
And at a certain point, I ran out of stories. I knew what the arc was going to be, but the individual stories I had worked out ahead of time, I began to chew through really fast, and I had to surrender to the characters and say, look, I know where I'm going here. You know where you're going in your personal lives. Let's meet somewhere in the middle. And from that understanding, I began just trusting them more and more, and trusting their voices, and letting them find the way was I had no choice. I had 110 episodes to produce. I had to sort of give way to that. Desperation is a great teacher. And by the time I finished that show, I had come to a point where I had become more transparent to the process so they could just pass through me. Then when I started doing Spider-Man and comics, I was able to apply those rules of just saying, okay, Peter, I know who you are. I grew up with you as a kid, as a reader. I know what you want to do. Just show me the story. And sure enough, he then took it around with it.
You know, it's funny you mentioned Spider-Man, because I particularly enjoyed your run on the book many years ago. And the thing that really amazed me about it, you know, when you go back and you read, you know, this Straczynski run on Spider-Man, I mean, these are characters that have been established for decades. I mean, you came in, you know, as a writer for hire for Marvel. You know, you were specifically hired to rejuvenate this character, make them interesting again. And I was like, I don't know if you can do with Spider-Man what has been done with Daredevil or some of the other, you know, minor characters. You know, what's this guy gonna do with Spider-Man? And you did some amazing things with the character. And for me, I mean, everyone talks about some of the more controversial arcs. The arc I truly, truly loved was Aunt May's discovery that her nephew, Peter Parker, was Spider-Man. And I think that the way you handled that, the angst that they both felt, Peter's temptation to lie to her, to say, it's not what you think. I mean, just because you saw me laying on the sofa in a costume, blah, 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 blah. The way you handled that, you know, all those themes that you normally tackle, you know, choice and responsibility and repercussions and all that was, you know, embodied in that comic book. And in Aunt May's, you know, like, she didn't know how to relate to her nephew initially anymore. Did you get any pushback from Marvel when you first said, look, I'm going to take this character in a radical direction? Stan Lee always predicted that Aunt May would drop dead if she ever found out that her nephew was Spider-Man. I'm going to go there, you know, and she was such a beloved character. What sort of reaction did you get from the folks upstairs when you said, I'm going to do this?
I always have a conversation with anyone I'm going to work with to say, look, I'm going to take chances with the storytelling. I'm going to push it to the limit and then 5 degrees beyond that. And if you're not cool with that, tell me now, we'll go our separate ways. And with Marvel, it was the same thing. And also, I had Axel Alonso, who was in my editor on Spidey. I said, we have to have understanding. I'll work nonstop, but I have only one rule: don't touch my stuff. You can do whatever you want, but don't touch it. And he never changed a word of anything. They were unsure at first, but I said, this is what I want to do, and they, in full credit to them, let me do it. I believe that, as you say, the common logic was that if Aunt May ever discovered that Peter Parker was Spider-Man, she would just fall over dead.
Right.
And I never bought that misogynistic bullshit for a second. I think that this is someone who saw the death of her husband, the death of Peter's parents, raised a kid by herself. That takes a spine of solid titanium. And of course she could handle it. The whole moral of the story was that those who love us most can handle our most personal truths.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that he got his powers from the spider, but he got his strength from Aunt May. And what was great about that storyline was I got so many emails and notes from people and at conventions and conversations from folks who said that it encouraged them to come out as bi or gay or transgender to their family members and then say things that they thought that they could never handle. And the reality is we make that so big on our own heads. If I tell someone the truth, oh my God, they're going to die or terrible things will happen. I had a friend just recently come to me and say, listen, I never told you for the last 20 years I am gay. And it's like, I knew that. we all kind of knew that. Where were you? Why are you late to the party? And by the way, it doesn't mean anything. And he was almost like depressed, like, I thought you'd be upset. No, it's why? So I think that the whole message of that is taking chances and letting the truth speak for itself, because those who love us can handle it.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's and along the same lines. I mean, when you follow your own muse, you basically you set up front, I'm going to take chances. There are later storylines that were less popular and so forth. And how did you process that? How did you deal with the fact that comic book fandom, which is, you know, basically saturated with all sorts of folks who are really quite static. They don't want the character to change, whether it's been 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. They have a particular mythology in mind, you know. So you do some things along the, you know, with Gwen Stacy and the Green Goblin and so forth that just, you know, for a lot of these folks, that was like beyond the pale. How did you deal with that? I mean, when you went to conventions, because you were public enemy number one there for for a minute. How did you deal with that?
By acknowledging my own stupidity. Which is really easy for me to do because there's a lot to work with. With Sins Past, originally the kids were going to be Peter's children, Peter and Gwen, that they had gotten together. And I remember having lunch with Joe Quesada and Bill Hemas talking about that story, and Joe said, no, it can't be Peter, and makes him too old. Make it, you know, Osborne. The fans will go nuts. And
well, that was true.
Yeah, and I didn't understand that. Well, they've been doing this for a long time. They must know what they're doing. Sure, I'll get on board the Titanic with you. Why not?
Oh, so that wasn't like you like listening to, you know, the ghost in your head. It was like other folks saying, "Hey, Joe, why don't you try this?"
Yeah, it's like pull my finger. It did not occur to my benefit. Same thing on One More Day. I mean, I really.
Wait, you wrote One More Day?
Yeah, and Joe and I went round and round about that one quite a bit.
Wow,
because
I didn't realize that.
I wasn't sure about the whole Mephisto aspect to it. I didn't really much like that. And
oh my goodness!
I actually almost took. I tried to take my name off the last issue because actually Joe wrote most of that.
Oh my God!
But by then they had solicited it and everything else. But so whenever I've learned the hard way, whenever I listen to outside voices, I get fucked. So I just got to listen to me and to the characters, and everyone else get the hell out of my life.
I don't know how that got by me. I obviously read that, and I just didn't remember that you had written that. It's been so many years, but
you're leaving now, aren't you?
Well, this has been very interesting. Bye. But
happens all the time.
Well, maybe one day. I mean, you're certainly of the literary stature that they're going to say, "Hey, if you ever want to come back and maybe even reverse engineer, you know, One More Day or some of these things." I mean, do you think you would have a story, something that would, I don't know.
I'm not sure if I would have a story, but the characters would have a story, and I'd be able to listen to what they have to say. Right now, I'm writing comics for Artists, Writers, and Artisans, a new comic book company, but Axel Alonso, who was at Marvel, founded. And The Resistance, which has done really, really well for them, about people after a pandemic coming up with powers as a result, and new book called Moth. So I'm having a lot of fun working for AWA right now.
I gotta check those out. Yeah,
they're a lot of fun. But if Marvel ever wanted to reconsider or say, listen, come back and do Spidey or someone else, that would be very tempting.
So we were talking earlier, and you said you're working on a sequel to Together already, and I wonder, I think you said you took a year to write this book, you know, that just came out. As you're sort of exploring, you know, this sort of, quote, for lack of a better word, serious fiction as opposed to genre fiction, what do you find to be the biggest impediment to your writing, if there's any impediment at all? Do you find that your writing slower or faster? I mean, do you have a different set of considerations when you're writing for books that are going to be reviewed in the New York Times and the LA Times and so forth.
Yeah, I think you can't dwell on the aftermath of the process. You know, you have to stay clear and true to the process while you're in it. Won't be let anything else start changing your perspective, or what will people think if I do A, B, and C? You're dead as an artist. You have just nowhere to go. The first book took a year because there were just so many different points of view to consider, and very sensitive subject, and I want to be really careful about it. The book I just finished is not a sequel, but it's a story unto its own that looks at the confluence between the protest movement and those who are saying that if you are a protester, something is wrong with you mentally, and how far would they take that in trying to shut down the protest movement.
Is that contemporary, or is it?
Yeah,
it's
contemporary. Okay. It's very much contemporary, and it's kind of like, the spiritual grandchild of Cuckoo's Nest in some respects.
Okay.
And I wanted to sort of talk about the importance of the protest movement and the significance of that, and how far a government will go to try and stop that from happening.
Sometimes when we read at least your comics and look at your sci-fi, you're clearly politically minded. You do think about politics. I mean, it sort of bleeds through, not in an obnoxious way or a didactic way, but there are political realities to what you write about. Have the last 4 or 5 years been particularly vexing for you? I mean, as a sensitive artist, as someone who is, seems to have a very humane view of the world, despite the things that you've gone through. I mean, do you find yourself sort of like raging against the dying of civilization's light, as you're, look around and see what's happening in society and our politics?
Yes, because I have an interesting perspective in the sense that I remember as a kid in the 60s, I was kind of there for like conscious, more or less, like the first last years of the 50s, 58, 59, but I remember the 60s. And you saw, on the one hand, just tremendous open displays of prejudice and sexism and misogyny and racism. And then the counterforce in the 60s that came up to say, we're fighting that. And by the way, if you say these things out loud, you're a jerk. And there we hit kind of a period where whether it got better or not, I'm not in the position to say, but at least certain terms were not being as used as openly. And I think people are starting to learn you can't do that stuff or you're a jerk. And now we've had this retrograde process over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years where you have open racism and open misogyny and open just horrific things being said and done in ways that feel like we've popped all the way back to the 50s again.
Yeah.
And I lament that. I lament for our progress. I lament for where we are as a country. I think the most of my work, I won't say all, but most of it, like Sense8 and Babylon 5 and this novel, are all about the notion that we're better together than we are apart, that the common coin of our shared humanity should trump whatever comes against us.
Yes.
That we must see ourselves as a species and come together in that respect and stop marginalizing and factionalizing and tribalizing each other, and see the value in each other. An iron sword breaks, iron sword shatters. It's only got one thing going on in it. Steel, an alloy of other metals, bends. Steel lasts. We must be steel, not iron. And I am appalled by where we are right now. And I think our only real hope is going to be the millennials and the Gen Zs. I honestly believe they're going to change the world. And I'm sorry that we made it even worse than it was a few years ago to try and fix it.
Right. Well, we have some questions here that probably should cycle through here. 2 of them I think I can combine. It says, please share some of the interesting research you did for the book, the medical condition, you did a little bit of that, legal issues and so on. What did you find in your research that surprised or delighted you? And then another follow-up question to that is, your book shows that you really understand the younger generation, their interests and their difficulties. Did you research about this? How are you so connected to young people? I'm reminded of something you said in being a writer, staying a writer, about having to stay connected to the world. So if we can take those two questions.
I did a lot of research on suicide, attempted suicide, and the laws about that, how they vary from state to state, to sort of plan out the route they were going to follow as they went into the story. Medical conditions as I needed it. So for instance, the blue guy shows up, I better figure out what that's all about.
Right.
Because I have a background in psychology, I kind of already know about how bipolar works and how depression works. So I was able to sort of factor that in. And for the first time ever make use of that frickin' degree.
And you were glad you did make use of it, see?
Yeah, that's worth all the tuition.
There you go.
So I did it sort of on an a la carte as needed basis. Because unfortunately, I can go way too deep if I start researching everything. I'll never leave the computer. In terms of the staying young part of it, I've worked really hard never to grow old. And there's some people, when I say that, what happens is it becomes about staying immature or staying nostalgic for the past. And I've always been about embracing change and being open to new ideas and new music and new cultures. I think there's nothing on your playlist newer than 10 years, or you don't have a playlist, or you know what a playlist is, you've got a problem. And it's so funny because very often, for instance, I talk to people much younger than myself. They said, you sound like we do. You think like we do, and it messes them up. My big problem in life, I should have such a problem, is that those who I look like, I don't think like. And those who I think like, I don't look like. So I'm like a man without a demographic. My neighborhood here is all attorneys and bookkeepers and accountants and money people. We don't associate. We don't talk. I'm the weird guy in the neighborhood. And I didn't know how weird I was, the weird guy, till one day, as I always keep weird hours, I'm an artist. I was out getting my mail, and across the street, a bunch of little gappy dogs. And one of them broke free and wanted to get away from the people who live there. They're very annoying. And I would too if I was him. And the woman chases the dog into the street, almost to me, picks up the dog. And as she walks away, I hear her say to the dog, quote, "I've told you before, stay out of the street and away from this strange man."
Wow.
I was never prouder.
Wow. That's a great story. I scrolled down. I'm going to take it from the bottom up now. What ghosts would you most want to be haunted by? And what ghosts would you most not want to be haunted by? I'm not quite sure I understand that question, but maybe you would.
It'll be the person who asked that question. And by the way, I can find you.
All right. Next question. How much world building did you do for Together We Will Go in comparison to The Resistance, Babylon 5, Sense8, and other large projects you've created? And or how did it differ from setting up a smaller book?
There wasn't a lot of world building because it's set in the real world. So there's most of that's already built. Except in New Jersey, where they haven't really built anything well. It was more about researching the places they go to, and are there any ways in which the areas they go to can comment on the story, whether that's a small village or whether it's Orlando. Can I use these locations to heighten the story? So, for instance, there's a section in the book where the character who suffers from chronic pain and tends to be depressed walks into a museum of glass, where they have beautiful glass sculptures and paperweights, and is enchanted by the beauty of trivial things. The idea of making a beautiful glass paperweight, a thing to put on top of a thing, was just a transformational moment for her. And what happened was I was looking at the route I was taking them on and came across this one town. Okay, what's near the freeway? What's near there? So the Museum of Glass. Oh crap! I know exactly what to do with that.
Wow.
So that became an important part of the story. And you let the story kind of discover itself as you go.
That's some amazing serendipity right there. I mean, you're probably the luckiest writer in the world. I mean, this happens
Honestly,
to you all the time.
the fact that I can make a living in what I do, it makes me the luckiest writer in the world. Every day I get to get up and do what I love for a living. What's better than that, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Here's another question. You often talk about how your characters tell you what they will do. Did any of the ones in this book surprise you by either saying, I have changed my mind, or I'm going through with it?
Not in that respect so much as how they handle it. So for instance, there's a character named Lisa in the book who is the bipolar character, who is the most annoying person in the entire story, not just to the characters, but to the reader as well. And the deeper I got with her, it's like, how the hell is this character ever going to redeem herself, you know, and do something positive? And even toward the end, she was saying, I just want to do one positive thing in my life and be known for something other than being a pain in the ass. And she does something at the end that surprised me, but that made absolute complete sense about where it was going to go. I don't want to give the end out, or spoilers, but that's the character, and that was the big surprise for me.
Along those lines, was there anything about Theo and their Silver City that didn't find its way into the book?
No, I think that she's also a writer and doing these stories about a world better than the one we inhabit. She calls it the Silver City, and I have her at one point read a section to the group, but I don't quote it. I instead play their reactions to it, because their reaction is so over the top that whatever I actually put in would not be the equal to the reaction. So let them go, oh my God, that was like an amazing thing ever. Let the audience wonder what that was. So I think that sometimes less is more. There's an old saying, to suggest is to create, to define is to kill. And that definitely falls into that category.
You know, it's funny, you know, you've written an autobiography, and you've written a book about becoming a writer, which is also indirectly autobiographical. And I wonder if you know, when you go into a bookstore and you look at the shelves of books on how to write a novel, how to become a writer, so forth and so on, what do you feel that you were bringing with these two books that wasn't already on the shelves? I mean, I could tell you what I think you brought, but what do you think that you brought into the world when you wrote those two books, especially your latest book, Becoming a Writer? What niche does it fill, or what gap does it fill?
I'd rather hear your thought about it.
Yeah, but these people don't want to hear me. They want to hear, you know, J. Michael Straczynski.
I want to hear you though, so there we are.
Well, obviously your story is so singular, so idiosyncratic, and I think that it also shows the power of perseverance and just sort of knowing your mission in life. You knew you wanted to be a writer, and you weren't going to let anything interfere with that. And whatever the tragedies were and whatever the things were that got in your way, you know, you were able to deal with it. And in a way, you become the positive example because of all the negative things that have happened to you, that you have done this incredible amount of work that is the envy of everyone. But no one would trade places with you, because if it meant to go through that hell, they wouldn't do it. So you're saying, okay, you don't have to go through hell. Just listen to me. Listen to what I say in this book about how to write. Listen to that. Or or take this book seriously and really, you know, struggle with the existential implications of being alive, and don't succumb to writer's block, and take yourself and your gifts seriously. I mean, that's really emphatic, declarative stuff that you don't really see in a lot of writers' books. And I think your particular story really fuels, it really inspires people in a way that other books don't. That's my theory.
I think you're absolutely right. No, I think that if there's anything that was behind all those books, it's I teach the gospel of it's possible. We have seen, particularly in the last 10, 20 years, the diminishment, the marginalization of the individual. The individual is powerless. That society changes to large movements. The individual can't change anything. And I don't believe that. I think that you have the potential to change the world, that you can have a voice that people want to listen to, and you have a story that is worthy of being told. I said before, if one person with a bullet can change the future in India or in Memphis or in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, how much more can one person with an idea change the world? But we are told every day you can't fight City Hall, you can't change the world, the individual doesn't matter, no one wants to hear what you have to say. And I wanted to say, no, you can do those things. You can change the world. You can fight City Hall. You can tell a story. I am socially maladroit. I have no personality that science has yet discovered.
Come on, Joe.
I don't always speak very well. I have a face that looks like it was hit by a piece of metal over and over repeatedly. But despite all of that, and coming from absolutely nothing, I can somehow do this. And if I can do this, God knows anybody else can do it. There are people watching this right now who are hipper and smarter and more creative than I will ever be. They just need someone to say, it's possible. It's not a guarantee, but possible is all we really need.
Yeah. I think that's that's the answer. You've got some more questions here. Outside of Vaughn, most characters in the book were fairly young, in their 20s. How intentional was that age gap? And did you consider including other characters in their 30s, 40s, 50s?
It was completely intentional. I wanted them all to be in the mid-20s, partly because I think suicide is much more horrific when you're in your 20s than when you're an old guy. And right now, suicide is the #2 cause of death among people in their 20s. I also wanted to write a love letter to millennials, to Gen Zs, and provide at the same time an open door of communication between one character who was in the 60s and them, because my demographic consistently craps on millennials and Gen Zs in ways that are completely out of line and false and untrue, and are blaming them for things that they inherited. And having those people can't understand the younger folks. So I wanted to create a conduit where that conversation can happen in a very honest and straightforward fashion. And the one thing that I've seen most often is like Goodreads and the comments elsewhere is that it made the readers who were on the older side see that group of people in a different way and in a more human way.
Oh, wow.
And say, oh, my prejudices were wrong about them. And so that's why it was so important to make sure those voices were correct and true to who they are, not someone older trying to sound younger, but someone listening to the younger character and just writing out what they say.
Right.
Nothing worse than an old guy trying to sound hip.
No one will ever accuse you of that, that's for sure. Everything sounds very authentic. Another question. I'm about to make a major life-changing decision based on your advice and becoming Superman, to decide what's the worst thing that could possibly happen if you do something. And if you can live with that, go ahead and do it. just making sure I have that correct, and wondering if you have any advice if something even worse than I can imagine happens. Oh boy.
This is probably a conversation more for a shrink than for myself, because unless I know what that
Hey, you
thing
have a
is,
shrink background.
I know, but I'm not
Here
sitting
you are
there,
ducking it.
I'm not sitting in a room with this person hearing what they have to say. No, what I meant when I said that is taking personal responsibility and consequences.
Yeah. Mhm.
That there have been several times in my career when I had to sort of take a stand creatively against suits or executives or notes or what have you, knowing that I might well lose my job.
Yeah.
And when you have to take a stand, it's incumbent upon you to say, okay, if I do this, what's the worst that can happen? And I got fired, I can maybe lose my career, lose the house. And if you are okay with those possible consequences,
Mhm.
go for it.
Right.
You know, because very often we don't think anything bad will happen. Well, no, just game it out, just game it out. And there's always a doctrine of unintended consequences. You don't know what's going to happen. So
Right.
think it all through. And if you're happy and content with what happens to you, not someone else, but your personal consequences of your actions and behavior, then go for it. And what this person has to do, I don't know. Go with God, love and gain, have a good time. I can't help you.
It's like, good luck. Another question. From the beginning, I've enjoyed the great lines of wisdom in your work. I began outlining sensei in a formal way to try to catch those gems and analyze other elements of how you crafted it. How do you enable these moments of self-awareness to come through your characters?
Probably comes from overthinking everything, like a lot. I spend a lot of time in my own head thinking about stuff I probably shouldn't think about. I tend to go deep on everything. There's some people who you ask them what time it is, will give you a history of the watch. And sadly, I am terrible. I love reading philosophy. I love reading psychology. I love even reading theology. I've read every holy book there is to read.
Mhm.
But ultimately, it comes down to what gets caught in my filter, what I'm angry about, what I feel strongly about, and then the character.
Yeah.
It's this weird cocktail. We throw all the mixes into the pot, and weirdly enough, out sometimes comes a rough wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. Here's a question that I can really relate to as someone who used to bug Harlan Ellison by calling him long distance when I lived in New York, and asking him to talk about short stories just out of the blue. He didn't know me from Adam. But it says, you've mentioned in the past that Harlan.
Adam was shorter.
What was that?
Adam was shorter.
Oh, okay.
We met once.
Ah, well, yeah. You've mentioned in the past that Harlan Ellison was a mentor earlier on in your career. Can you talk about how he has influenced your writing then and now? Also, are you able to share anything about the new Dangerous Visions anthology you've announced? You've taken over at Dangerous Visions?
Yeah, I'm finishing it up now. It's gonna be probably done by end of this month. Actually, the original stories, some were pulled out. We got original new stories coming in from really top flight writers who want to be part of this thing. So yeah, that's gonna be finished up in his memory. For what I learned from Harlan, there's a ton about language and structure and dynamics and being a writer. But if there's any one thing that I learned from that made the biggest difference, is that Harlan was fucking fearless.
Mm-hmm.
You could not back him into a corner. And he was always willing to put himself on the line, whether that was politically, personally, with friends who were in trouble. I know so many friends who we go to dinner and never met a check they liked, but Harlan always picked it up. But
Wow.
in his storytelling and in his work, he was fearless. And you cannot change genres. You cannot take chances as a writer. You cannot grow as a writer unless you're willing to be fearless and be willing to risk all of it. And that's probably the number one thing that I learned from Harlan.
Yeah, there's something about the golden age of the sci-fi writers. Well, actually, he would have been in the middle period, in the 60s and the 70s and so forth. All of those writers are stunning the way they opened up the world. And as someone who was reading was coming of age primarily in the 70s, you know, just reading these guys was mind blowing. And I like sci-fi today. It doesn't move me as quite as much. And I wonder if you feel, as we come up close to the hour here, what do you think about sci-fi and its changes over the generations? I mean, do you relate better to the earlier stuff, or are you cool with the later stuff?
Well, the earlier stuff, Golden Age in particular, was dry and story driven for the most part. It was written by guys who were afraid of girls. Let's just be honest. And then you had this flowering in the 60s and 70s of new wave science fiction of Chip Delaney and Riders of Leslie and Rudy Spinrad and Harlan Ellison and Bob Silverberg, who were challenging social and political norms and sexual norms and opened it up and blew it apart. And that seems to have gone by the wayside. We're down now to things that at least in terms of the mainstream science fiction. Obviously, there's still avenues for some of it further down, like online. But a lot of the mainstream science fiction is adventure, not political. It is not as emotionally resonant as some
How
of
did
that
that happen?
was.
How did that happen? I mean, you know,
they got afraid. The people who were willing to put their necks out got in trouble sometimes, and or publishers didn't want to publish controversial material, and they learned to self-censor. That's why I think it's so important to have dangerous fictions out there, because there's stories in there that once again challenge the norm and challenge where science fiction should be. And I think that it needs to, as much as it is, you know, outward looking toward empires and starships and all cool stuff, it also needs to address the human heart in ways that it's not necessarily always being dealt with.
Right. The messiness of human existence, even in the future or in another dimension or whatever. One question I'm gonna ask you, one quick question. Someone wanted to know what kind of chair you use for some reason.
It's a gaming chair, a Secret Lab gaming chair, because these things are designed, as you know, gamers park themselves at a convention and they are in that chair for 16 hours and they never get up. And so rather than an office chair, I find a gaming chair is much more conducive to comfort and not being cranky with my assistant.
So when you're writing the great American novel many times, the great American script, you're sitting in a gaming chair.
Yes.
All right. Now that's something that now watch, people will be going on Amazon for the next few hours buying gaming chairs so they can be like you.
I should get a bonus from this. I should get a percentage of the action.
There you go. According to my clock here in Western Pennsylvania, it is 9 p.m. and I'm willing to keep going, but I'm waiting for instructions from Nick and, you know, Jeremy. Should we keep going?
You can maybe take like another couple questions if you want. That's probably fine.
Okay.
Or we could also close it up. We could also close it up now. So I know you have a lot of questions.
We should ask Joe how he's feeling.
Yeah, how do you feel?
We can do another 5 minutes, let's say.
Let's do that. That sounds perfect. So you got a lot of good questions in there. So go ahead.
And we start going until a few minutes after. So it's all part of God's great plan.
All right.
All right. Here's a question, and I think you've already answered it. About 50 pages into Together We Will Go, and loving the characters already. Are they all creations, or are some based on people in your life?
They're all creations, original creations. There are some elements of them that are small that tie to people that I knew in the past, in terms of how they left the world and some of their behavior patterns. But I never take anything whole cloth. I think you need to make everything fictionalized, or then it's not. Otherwise, you're not writing; you're just reporting.
Right. Is there, what is the most? I mean, and this is me, as you know, Tony Norman, a writer, asking, what has been the most influential book for you as a writer? A book that has sort of inspired you when you questioned your own meaning and purpose. Whether it was a book about writing or whether it was a novel, what has inspired you?
going back to Harlan Ellison, his introductions to his stories talked a lot about being a writer and the writer's life and the discipline of that and the importance of keeping going. I mean, Harlan was, booted out of Ohio State University, and like me, he came from the streets. He came from nothing. He was a street rat, both street rats, but that's how he bonded over some of that. So in terms of keeping going, I would say it was Harlan's work. If I had to talk about a book for purposes of craft, I would say probably Stephen King's On Writing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And by that time, you were already an established writer when that book came out. I mean, you were already doing screenplays and that. I think that book came out in the 80s.
Somewhere in there, yeah. It's just it's a great piece of work.
Yeah. I think you will be a wonderful professor. I hope that the folks at Masterclass do invite you to do a masterclass. I think people would truly be inspired by just how your own personal biography fuels your ability to write relentlessly.
Thank you. I did teach briefly at San Diego State this past semester, only because I come from there. But I've had a number of major universities offer me professorships, but I've always said no, because when it comes time for me to teach, I would much rather teach at a junior college than at a university. Because if you can afford, like, say, just randomly UCLA or USC or NYU, you don't need my help. You've got all the money and contacts you need. I came up to the community college system, and those are the ones who could profit the most from whatever I could bring to them. So I'd much rather do that and take a high university position. I just think I go where I'm needed.
Do you think screenwriters or wannabe screenwriters should invest money into a program somewhere, or should they just sit down and write and just pitch from outside the university? Like, you don't need to go to USC to learn screenwriting, obviously, but do you think having those credentials is necessary to break into the business that you broke into becoming a screenwriter and writing inventing TV series and so forth?
I think it's variable. I think that if you're a filmmaker going to NYU and making short films you can then use as calling cards, it's useful. But for writers, I'm not sure, because most of the writers most people who I knew who got degrees in writing didn't become writers, they became teachers. And the problem with a lot of writing programs is that they teach you to write like everybody else. The problem is we already have everybody else. So why should we listen to what you have to say? That being said, there's something to be said for talking about story and working with other people and picking in university workshop sessions where you are putting your story in amongst everybody else to be critiqued into the maw of the beast. If it's not a very good story, they will let you know in no uncertain terms. So my feelings are very mixed about it. I think in some ways it can help, some ways it can actually hurt by making you learn bad habits. So I leave that to the discretion of the individual.
All right. Well, on that note, I just want to thank you, J. Michael Straczynski, for talking to us, dropping that deep wisdom for all of us writers out here who've been fans of yours for years, sometimes decades. It's great to meet the man behind so many words and so many great words that have it's been formative for us. And so thank you, thank Powell's for making this possible. And this has been a thrill. So thank you.
Me too. I agree. Nice to talk to you.
Right.
Good job today.
All right.
All right, guys.
All right. Thank you so much, both of you. That was, it was a wonderful and inspiring conversation. And we appreciate having you both here to give it to us. So, and thanks to everyone for tuning in this evening. Please consider purchasing Straczynski's new novel. I've got it right here. So you can get that on powells.com. And while there, please be sure to check out our lineup of other upcoming virtual events. And we look forward to seeing you soon in another one. So Joe and Tony, thanks so much for sharing your time with us.
It's been a pleasure. I look forward to, I'm going to stay in touch with you, Joe.
You got it.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys. Good night, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.